So now we are going to the second session that is to be done by Dr. Subhash Chandra Patnaik. So on behalf of everyone, I would like to welcome Dr. Subhash Chandra Patnaik, who is a coordinator and MBA, regular and executive program at the Department of Business Management, Central University of Orissa. Sir is an MBA by profession, and he's also a teacher having 12 years of teaching experience. In his credits, Sir is having 7 publications at a very renowned journal, which includes Scopus Index, Web of Science Index, ABDC Rank Journal. Beside that, Sir also have got 4 paper presentation and had participated at various seminar, conferences, and workshops. Sir also have 1 case writing in his credit, which is on Trade Bull Securities Private Limited, Ahmedabad, under the guidance of Professor Vijay Sherichan, Professor and Chair, RGM Central of Educational Innovation, Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He had also acted as a resource person at various international virtual workshops on the thesis of writing and publication and research methodology workshop, which was organized by St. Claret College, Bengaluru. So, sir, we would like to welcome you, and I would like to hand over the session to you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Good evening, all, and namaste to all. First of all, I'm thankful to the organizers like IEQAC Shillong Law College and Cape Comorin Trust, India. And I'm particularly thankful to Dr. Regin, who has given me at least 2 chances to be a resource person for such FEDPs. Okay. Madam, I think I'll start my presentation now. Hello.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Today I'll use my own experience. Actually, from my own experience, I'll try to summarize some of the important aspects of an empirical research paper. There are actually 2 major types of research papers we have. One is qualitative, the other one is quantitative or empirical research paper. The reason why I've chosen my presentation on empirical research paper is 85% of research papers are empirical in nature, and most of the journals, very important journals and famous journals, deal with this empirical side of the research. And that's why I have tried my level best to give an overview of the essential parts of an empirical research paper. Actually, in any kind of research, I remember correctly in the last presentation, madam said that research is not a creative writing, it's an academic writing. Actually, we also in social science practice the same thing. We use academic writing for writing research papers, and the main object of doing research is knowledge generation. Actually, there are other sources of knowledge generation as well. One is experience. Out of experience we generate knowledge, and out of intuition also sometimes we generate knowledge. We do something as part of our gut feelings and it comes true, then we keep on doing that, and that become part of our knowledge. It may also be tradition, which I've not mentioned. So through tradition we get a great deal of knowledge, but research is the best way of generating knowledge, because we investigate and we use logic, and there is solid proof behind it. Unless we get the proof of something, we do not accept it. And the present age, which is scientific age, we always rely on research. For example, in the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which is not yet over, we really did a lot of research. The scientific community did a lot of research, and they invented vaccines. And we did not use experience, we did not use intuition, we did not use tradition. Rather, we used research, because research convinces the mankind because of its robustness, because of its logicality, because of the reason we use. Okay. In social science also, we use generally research for knowledge generation. So I'll be dealing with that aspect of knowledge generation. When it comes to research in social science, I believe there are two most important pillars of research. One is induction, the other one is deduction. What is induction? From observation to theory. We generally generate theories. Generalize from observations. We have got observations, we see something, we experience something, and we try to understand why this happens, and we go for a logic. We see the patterns and we go for a logic. And that is not the main objective of today's presentation. And I'm going to make a presentation on the second pillar of research. That is, there are so many theories, and theories are not always perfect. There are different grades of logics. One is, it may be a hypothesis, it may be theory, it may be a law. A theory is a logical explanation, but a theory is not perfect in itself. A theory needs to be tested again and again in order to see whether the theory really works. Why a theory has to be tested? You see, most of the time we depend on the theory and we apply this theory for day-to-day problems of our life. If it is business administration, or it is a social problem, or it may be an economic problem, we use the theory. But if the theory itself is wrong, then we come to wrong conclusions. This happens most of the time. That's why there is always an effort to test the theory, and that is what empirical research does. We test the theory, whether the theory really stands or not, and if the theory stands, what is the scope of it? A theory may not be applicable in all aspects. We can't generalize it. What is the generalizability of theory? A theory may be applicable to only one case, or theory may be applicable to large number of cases. If a theory is applicable to a large number of cases, then that is a theory, a good theory. So we try to, even if we say that this theory is working in this particular aspect, then we extend it. We try to see whether the theory is working in some other aspect or not. Okay, and that is where empirical research comes. Empirical research is nothing, it is mostly theory testing research, and where we use the deductive logic. Deductive means from general aspects to particular aspects. Okay. So when we go for empirical research or quantitative research, we generally have a philosophy behind it. Even qualitative research has got a philosophy behind it, and empirical research has also a philosophy behind it. The philosophy which is behind this empirical research is post-positivism. Okay, it was actually positivism earlier, now we call it post-positivism. What is positivism? We believe that in social science we can arrive at objective truth the way we get truth in physical science, like chemistry, physics, mathematics, and other physical sciences, or maybe even life sciences. Okay, there is an objective truth, and there is a scientific method through which we can discover this objective truth. Those who believe in empirical research, they believe in this. There is an objective truth. Truth may be objective or truth may be subjective. I will take a tree as God. That is a subjective truth. But whether this vaccine will work or not, this is an objective truth. It doesn't depend upon my own interpretation. This doesn't depend upon my own feelings. So it doesn't differ from person to person as well. And we believe that there is a scientific method, and we use this scientific method for discovering that truth. That is actually positivism. But what is the recent development? Now we know that we know that there is an objective truth, and we have to use scientific method. But now we know that we can't verify that truth. It is impossible to verify that truth. All the researchers in social science should accept one thing, that they cannot verify the truth. They cannot say that something is true. The only way out is they can say something is not true. Indirectly, they say that that's why something else may be true. Suppose I take a theory, I want to prove it. I cannot actually prove it. I will take a theory which is an antithesis of that. Sometimes we call it a null proposition, null hypothesis. Then we try to reject it. Therefore, we get proof for our hypothesis. And this is the essence of this philosophy, post-positivism. Though there is an objective truth, we can't verify it. Let me go for a small example. I'll say the sun rises in the east, but this cannot be verified because till today the sun has come from the east, but tomorrow it may be from the west. Who knows it? Yeah, as long as we do not get something which is contradicted, this is true. So we can't prove anything. And this is the essence of post-positivism. Now we use this philosophy for doing empirical research. And this is one of the most important philosophies for empirical research. And this is the reason why we take null hypothesis most of the time when we do research. There is a British psychologist, he is Karl Popper, who says that you can't prove any hypothesis, you can only falsify a hypothesis, you can only disprove a hypothesis. That's why we always take null hypothesis. Of course, this is not the main point I'm going to discuss here, but this is just for developing a sense of inquiry in the audience. In any empirical research, there are two important skills we require. One is theoretical skills, the other one is methodological skills. Yeah. Between these two skills, theoretical skills are very hard to get by, and methodological skills are not that hard, and there are standard procedures. But sadly, during our PhD coursework, or maybe during our MPhil coursework, we are taught a lot about methodological skills, and these are all standardized skills. I can learn, you can learn, and others can learn the same thing. But theoretical skills are very difficult to understand, but they are not generally taught at the university level. There are very few universities and there are very few authors who have actually discussed very clearly about the theoretical skills. That's why sometimes we see papers which may have very beautiful result analysis or maybe interpretation, but they lack in this part, theoretical aspect, because the researchers are not well trained in that. But my suggestion is we should be very, very good at theoretical skills. I have been a reviewer for 2-3 Emerald journals and one Wiley journal, and from my review experience, I know that whether a paper will be accepted for publication or not will be decided 75 to 80% from the theoretical aspects of the paper. Once that is okay, the editor will take interest in it and that will be sent to a reviewer. If this portion is poor, the editor doesn't take interest in the theoretical aspect of the paper, then that is dumped. There is desk rejection for the author. As long as we don't understand, there is always a sense of rejection in us. Theoretical skills and methodological skills. Methodological skills you can learn from any standard research methodology books, but theoretical skills have to be built very hard. So how you can build it? You have to read good research papers from good journals. You should make it a habit. We should make it a habit of reading good journal papers. From understanding the papers, we get the knowledge. how we can write this aspect of the research paper. And the two important sections of this theoretical portion is, one is your introduction and the other one is your theoretical framework, or sometimes we call it development of hypothesis section. These two are very important. If these two are not up to the mark, then the theory goes into the dustbin, the paper goes into the dustbin. You may be very, very good at the methodological section, but it doesn't work. Yeah. So I'll be trying through this presentation to impress upon the importance of this, and sometimes I'll also be telling you how we can go for this introduction part, where we have to generally mention the research gap and how the theoretical framework can be built. Okay. For any empirical paper, there are two planes. One is your theoretical plane, the other one is your empirical plane. So empirical plane is bit easy to deal with, but the theoretical plane is not that easy. Okay, that's what I have shown it here. Okay, and you see, in any empirical paper we do not have any proposition, anything like proposition, but in a qualitative paper we have got something called proposition. Why? In empirical paper we take the variable into consideration, whereas in a qualitative paper we take the concept into consideration. What is the difference between a concept and a variable? When a concept out definitions, and one of them is your IQ. One of them is your IQ. So IQ is a variable. So any relationship between IQ and some other variable is intelligence and something else. Then it is a mostly deal with hypothesis, which includes the variables, not the concepts. Okay. Yeah. Now the main aspect of my presentation starts. What are the essentials of a paper, particularly this empirical paper? So these are some of the points one has to consider before going for a paper. One is research question. Every research paper has got a research question. If there is no question, there is no need of an answer. If I write a paper without addressing a question, it is like reinventing the wheel. The wheel has already been invented. I'm trying to reinvent it. I'm doing the same thing. So every research question, every research paper has got a research question. That is the research gap. Okay. If this is okay, then I bet you're now on the right track to publish a paper. Well begun, half done. If you've got a proper research question, then I can tell you that 50% of the research work is over. I can tell you. Rest 20% from theoretical person is the theoretical framework or conceptual framework, and the rest is 30%. And this is not an easy one. I will give some practical hints from my experience or my learning from FDP program at IIM Ahmedabad, what my teachers have said, and my own experience. I will tell you some practical hints how you can go for a good research gap. Most of the papers are not publishable in a good journal, which are indexed by Scopus or Web of Science or ABDC and all these. The reason is they do not contain any new question. they discuss the old question which is already solved. Therefore, it doesn't have any merit in it, and the editors do not take interest in them. These papers may be published in non-descript journals, and now the UGC has tightened the noose around this quality of the journal. And if you publish papers, primarily I'm saying in social science, if you publish papers in journals which are not indexed by Scopus, Web of Science, and ABDC, the research community doesn't take interest in your paper, so there will be no citation for your paper. Okay, so that is the most important aspect research question, and I'll be discussing in the next few slides how you can go for a good research question, that is a research gap. The next aspect is a theoretical or a conceptual framework. Okay, I will go for a practical example of it. Because of the pandemic, 1 year before, the biggest question before the doctors and scientists were how we can go for a vaccine. There is no vaccine, that is the research gap. There is no vaccine, there is no cure for it, or there is no vaccine. If there were a cure, maybe vaccine was not that much needed, but there is no cure and there is no vaccine either. So there is a research gap. The question is how we can go for a vaccine. Okay, suppose I'll say that if you take onion, then COVID-19 will go. If suppose I will spend millions of dollars to test this, I will give onion to millions of people, I'll see what is the result, whether it prevents or not, whether antibodies are created or not, then this is waste of money. Why? Where from I got the logic that onion is going to prevent you from getting COVID-19? So this is not a right theoretical framework. If we start with a wrong theoretical framework, all our time and energy is waste. All our time, energies are waste. So we have to first logically argue that this is going to provide the prevention to COVID-19. So this is nothing but a theoretical framework. But when I say this is going to prevent something, I must use some logic. I must use some previous logic. Previous logic means what? I have to go to the literature and I have to do extensive literature review. Because we know every researcher stands on the shoulders of the giants. They say every researcher stands on the shoulders of the giants. So previous research has been done using that logic, that is a deductive logic. Okay, using the previous logic, we say that in this specific situation we can go for this kind of solution, but that solution should be with logic. Suppose tomorrow I'll go for X variable, whether it affects Y or not. Tomorrow I'll go for Z variable, whether it affects Y or not, randomly. Then this cannot be a theoretical framework or conceptual framework. I have seen, I want to repeat it here at the cost of repetition. Again, I want to tell you that most of the time people think that if they collect data and analyze the data and get some conclusion, then this is research. This is not at all research. This is only a survey. We may collect a large amount of data, analyze it, and go for some kind of conclusion. It may be by chance, because the sample you have picked may be such that it is not representative. So you come to a conclusion that this is the link between X and Y, but actually X and Y may not be linked at all. First, we have to argue what is the relationship between the variables we are going to consider. Suppose my objective is what is the relationship between quality of teaching and performance of students, academic performance of students. Then I have to logically argue what is the link between these two. Suppose I logically argue that there is a link between these two and there is a positive association between these two. If the quality of teaching increases, then the academic performance of students will also increase. So there are two variables here. One is the quality of teaching, and we have to devise some way out how to measure it. Okay, then it becomes a variable. Then second is academic performance of students, maybe in terms of their grades. So I have to first logically argue how these two are interlinked. Then I will go for a test. I will collect data from students who are exposed to good quality teaching. Then I will see their performance. But before I have any logical connection between these two and I want to collect data and test, this is only gambling. It may or it may not happen. And that is also not very useful for the mankind. The reason is we don't know the logic even. So it may be by chance. Okay. So theoretical and logical conceptual framework is very, very important. Here I want to give another example in order to make it clear. If people take coconut water, then they live longer. Suppose I go for research. What is the link between taking coconut water and longevity of people? Suppose I want to go for a test without any logicality. What will happen? I'll go to people. I ask them how often they take coconut water, and I see their maybe health condition. If the health condition is better, then we expect them to live longer. Without any logicality, this survey is going to be a waste of time, energy, and money. So I have to develop some link between these two. For example, I go for a link like this, and this logic will depend upon previous logic. That's why we call it deductive logic. Okay. How? Coconut water contains a lot of potassium. Somebody has done some research. This is not your concept. Coconut water has got potassium in it, rich in potassium. Suppose Smith 1998, you have cited this paper, and this paper cites that this is the fact. Then potassium replaces sodium in the body because of its position in the electrochemical cells, for example. So somebody has done this kind of research. You have to go for this particular logic. Then the third logic is potassium replaces sodium, and sodium is bad for health. So from medical science research, we know that sodium causes health problem like heart problem, kidney problem, blood pressure problem, and all this. So then using these three, I'm given just three research papers, we have built our own theoretical framework. And this is the reason why a good literature review is very important to build your theoretical framework. If I do not know these three facts from previous research, then I cannot argue logically that drinking coconut water will make you healthy, therefore you will live longer. That's why relevant literature review is a must for developing a very good theoretical or a conceptual framework, which is also very essential for your research question. But here also very, very important. And the third one is methodological rigor. So what is methodological rigor? See, you want to say that coconut water is going to give you good health. We want to test it. So when we go for testing this hypothesis, we have to use some method of testing. So what is the way of testing? Whether the method you have adopted is scientific in its nature or not. Then only people will believe it. Whether it is full of logic or not, then only other researchers will believe. If you do not have logic in it, if you do not know why you are doing it, suppose in India, girls and boys react differently to a particular social system, and I do a study taking only the boys, then this method is wrong. Why? Boys and girls react differently to a particular social system, and when we want to study their opinion, I have to take both boys and girls. So during the sampling procedure, I will go for stratified sampling, not simple random sampling. It may contain only boys by chance, or it may contain only girls by chance. Therefore, the opinion is lopsided. The opinion is biased. That is one example of methodological rigor. Therefore, I have to take a sample which is representative, and I know the fact that girls and boys react differently to this as social aspect. Therefore, I have to take both into my sample. So I have to go for stratified sampling, not cluster sampling, not simple random sampling. Okay, suppose there are 10,000 respondents, population is of 10,000, number. Suppose I'll take only 20 people out of them, a sample, and go for a research. The conclusion is not valid. The conclusion is not reliable. The reason is I've taken a microscopic portion of that. At least I should take maybe 500 or maybe 400. I'm not going to discuss that. I'm not going to put any exact figure right now. There are different methods how you can determine the size of the sample. But the size of the sample should be sufficient, should be adequate, so that the conclusion we get will also be valid. So if the methodological rigor is not there, any kind of research output you present will not be believed by the researcher and not by the editor and reviewers of your journal. Okay. The next one is, after you get the results, you analyze it, you have to discuss it, and discussion is one of the most important aspects of any research paper. If you just present it, you do not go for critical analysis, then it is valueless. So discussion portion of any empirical paper in social science is very, very important. And the last one is scientific communication. How do you communicate? Sometimes our papers get rejected. Brilliant ideas die in the cold storage. The reason is we are not able to express them clearly. And there is one type of writing which all students of social science, researchers of social science should be well versed, and that is your academic writing. Academic writing is not creative writing. It is not journalistic writing. The kind of writing you find in the Hindu, in the Times of India newspapers, that is a different kind of writing than the one we find in the research journals, maybe a SAGE research journal. So scientific communication is very, very essential. There is no place for your creativity. There is no place for exaggeration. You have to put the facts. Okay. So everybody has to learn it. And I've got a few books with me. Of course, some other time I can, or through the slide at the end of the presentation, I can share the names. At least one good book I can tell you, which will help you how to go for very good communication. See, your ideas may be very brilliant. You could not communicate. What will happen? That will go into dustbin. Okay. So we'll try to elaborate as much as possible in the next few slides. Yeah. The most important aspect of any research paper is introduction. I have already told you that there are two aspects which belong to the theoretical skills. One is the introduction, where you find the research gap, okay, or the problem statement and all these. And the next one is your theoretical framework, or your conceptual framework, or sometimes you call it development of hypothesis. Okay. So the first one is introduction. If this is not done properly, desk rejection is a certainty. And how frustrating it is to have your paper desk rejected. Sometimes when as a reviewer I reject it, I feel bad, but that has to be done because you have to serve the scientific community. See, if you want to do any kind of research, then the first thing is you have to join the conversation. What is conversation? The research community is doing conversation, and that conversation is presented in where? Journals. So you have to join the conversation. Let me give a small example why this is important. Suppose at our university we want to go for a picnic, and there is a discussion going on regarding the menu. The time when it starts is 9 a.m., but I reached the room at 9:10 a.m. I was late. So I entered the room and they asked me to suggest at least one food item for the picnic. Without knowing what others have suggested, suppose I will suggest, what will happen? My idea will be rejected. Suppose my friend, my colleague has already suggested for maybe chicken curry. I'll again say chicken curry. Then they won't take interest in my proposal. They have said that somebody else has already said this. The same is the case with research. If somebody else has done something and you want to do it again, then your effort is going to be in vain. You're losing your time, energy, and everything. And the result is failure and frustration. There is a sense of rejection. That's why the good idea is to listen to others first. When there is a meeting for deciding the menu for the picnic, the first thing is you listen to others. Then you give your proposal. So you name a dish, you name something, a food item, which others haven't at all proposed. Then people will take interest in your food item. The same is the case. Nobody has done something, you try to do it. Your paper will be published very easily. The editor will take a lot of interest. Yeah. So what is the practical procedure? Actually, there is a lot of theory we find in the books. And what is the practical procedure? This is from my experience and the advice I've got from very renowned teachers at IIM Ahmedabad, which is one of the best B schools in India. First one is go to the top 5 journals in the field. So there are different kinds of rankings. SCI Mago is one kind of ranking and other rankings are also there. And you pick 5 top journals in the field. Suppose I want to do any research in the area of employee engagement. Then I will find 5 top journals in the field. Because best research, the most updated research is published by good quality journals. If you go to bad quality journals, sometimes work which is already published may also be published with minor modifications. There is no novelty at all. That's why we should go to top journals. So we should go for 5 top journals in the field. Okay, you should be as recent as possible. If you go to old issues of the journal, then you may face the same kind of problem, reinventing the wheel. You may be doing the research which others have already done. Or you thought that in 2009 this was a burning research topic. You did not go through any journal papers from 2010 till today. But a lot of research has been done and you could not be aware of it. Therefore, you will again do it. So you are repeating the past research. So nobody will take interest in the paper. So what you do? Browse all the topics in the last 3 years only. Then identify, actually, when you browse all the topics in the last 3 years, you may be getting 50, 60 topics maybe. And all the topics may not interest you and you may not be good at also. I'm a teacher of organizational behavior or I may be a teacher of human resource management. There are so many topics I teach my students. But when it comes to research, you should have a very good grounding in the literature. So some of the topics may interest you or some of the topics you are good at where you can do more research. Okay. So that is what you have to decide what interests you, and you should also believe that you are good at it. Then you pick only those papers where such interesting topics are given and read the full paper. Yeah. And the references are always valuable. You read the full paper and you go to the back of the paper where references are given. You go to the references. And from the references you can, okay, from your reading of the paper and references, you can find the important related papers. The important papers on which this paper is based. So you go to those important papers. You read them. Suppose you've read 5 papers first, then you go to the references. Now in the second round you will have at least 15 papers. Then you go to the references of these 15 papers, then you go for more papers. So that way, once you read 50, 60, 70 papers, and this is just a rule of thumb, after reading 50, 60, 70 papers, of course, very passionately, then you will see that the same thing is being repeated. You don't find anything new. The kind of saturation has come. Then you understand that you have covered the literature almost fully. Now you are in a position to decide what has been done, what has not been done. From that you can find out the research gap. And the research topic which you decide should also be relevant. Sometimes it may be interesting, but nobody has done any work in that area, but it may not be relevant. For example, there is some aspect of typewriter which nobody has researched. There is some aspect of black and white TV nobody has researched. Don't do any research on that, because that is a thing of the past. Even if you publish a paper on that, nobody is going to take interest in that. So it should be relevant. For example, NPA in India, NPA in Indian banks is a relevant topic. Then you do some research, people will take interest, and it may be helpful to policy makers as well. So read these papers and identify the related papers. Okay, this is a kind of backtracking. Yeah. The introduction of any paper has a model, and that model is called deficiency model. Means the introduction of any paper tells you that there is some deficiency in the present research. The research that is now done up to the present day. So the literature has got some deficiency in it, and that deficiency has to be removed. So when you write the introduction part, you should have some of the points, then only it will indicate to the deficiency. One is the research problem, identifying research problem. Okay, how this is done generally? So you go to previous studies. Yeah, when you want to do any kind of research, it is very rare that nobody has done any research on that. Somebody might have done some kind of research. You never find any virgin area, right? The area which has not been at all researched. If you get an area, you are very blessed, but you generally don't find. So what do? You go for studies which others have done. Okay, they've tried to address the problem which you are going to address. So you review the literature. But you find that in those papers, there is some deficiency. There are some deficiencies. Maybe in terms of the methodology they've used, there is a deficiency. Or maybe one aspect has not been studied. Or the results of such studies are not consistent. One researcher says that there is a positive association with X and Y. Another researcher says that I don't find any association at all. Another researcher says that there is a negative association between these two. Then there could be some other factor which is affecting this relationship. There is no straight X and Y relationship. There might be some other variables which are coming in the way. So it may be a mediating variable or it may be a moderating variable. So this gives you the hint. So what are the deficiencies? One or more deficiencies in the past literature, and suggesting how the study will remedy these deficiencies. Then you try to suggest how your study is going to discover that. Okay. Then whenever you do any kind of research, it should always be significant. There should be significance. The study should have some significance for particular audiences. Suppose your research is practitioner oriented, then it is helpful for a particular audience. It may be helpful for academics, it may be helpful for doctors. Okay, so that you have to specify the audiences that will profit from the research on the problem. Finally, the overall intent of the study. Okay, see, actually I have given one research paper of mine recently published, in which if you go through the introduction, you will find that that is exactly there. This deficiency model is there, and I'm just, for lack of time, I'm not taking a lot of time, but I'm just reading one last paragraph which introduces the intent of the study. Okay, the study therefore sets out to examine the mediating role of job autonomy and supportive management in the relationship between transfer leadership and OCB. This is the main sentence of this paragraph. Then this says that I have got some intention of studying this. Okay, and why I'm doing this, I've also written, despite the fact that there are calls in the literature to, okay, blah blah blah, there is some deficiency in it. Therefore my research is expected to fulfill that. Unless you prove it, unless you state it very categorically, unless you convince the research community or the editor, your paper will not be given any attention. I'm very sure of that. So we should be very clear about that. Most of the time what happens, when we go for literature review, for introduction or this theoretical framework, we make it a kitchen sink. We put anything and everything that we get. No, that is not a good introduction, or that is not a good theoretical framework. It should logically flow. What the earlier studies are, what are the problems, whether others have tried to address the problem or not, how I'm going to address the problem, and how this is going to be useful for me. Such issues. That's why we don't say literature review of relevant literature. The word relevant literature is always used. If I go for literature, I may have a lot of material, but I should go for the relevant one, which is connected with my research. Okay. The other one is your theoretical framework, where we use the deductive logic. Yeah. So when we go for testing of hypothesis, we are using inductive reasoning, but here we are going for deductive logic. Okay. What is the theoretical framework? Most of the time people think that theoretical framework means a diagram. So there is a link between X and Y. There is an arrow, single-headed arrow coming from X and ending at Y. Oh, they think this is a theoretical framework. Or they go for some moderating and mediating variable and they think it is theoretical framework. So that is just a pictorial representation of it. So a diagram is not a theoretical framework. Most of the time we understand this way. And sometimes say that X and Y are connected. Simply saying that is not. So we have to explain how and why. These two are very important. If you put them properly, be sure 50-60% of your research work is over. So theoretical framework explains or predicts if X increases, what happens to Y, or what is the link between X and Y. Why X and Y are linked? You have to provide the explanation among the variables, of course, among the variables. Yeah. And whenever we use any kind of, when we write any kind of theoretical framework, we use some theory. For example, you see in my present paper, which is published by this management research review by Emerald Publishing, and here you see I used a very important theory called social action theory. This is a very important theory in social science, social action theory, given by Blau in 1964 in my paper. And I have used this social action theory to build these hypotheses. So I have logically said that if there is transpersonal leadership, then OCB will also increase. If there is increase in transpersonal leadership, there is increase in OCB. But how it happens, how I have explained it, by using a logic called social actions theory. The other name for theory is logic. Theory and logic are interchangeable. So this is the logic which I have used for building this hypothesis. Okay. So you would use some kind of theory in order to link the variables, and that is your hypothesis. And theory is what? It is an explanation. It's a logical explanation, not a wild guess. No hypothesis, no theory is a wild guess. If we go for wild guess and do the research, then it will be waste of time, money, and energy. Clear? So then I have used that logic to build this. Yeah. So these two are very, very important. I think there are a few good books. There are very few good books which deal with that, and no researcher should skip them. Okay, and this slide is very, very important to read. The theoretical framework is a natural extension of the literature review. See, any kind of theoretical framework, any theoretical framework is just an extension of the literature review. So it comes from the literature review. Why? If you want to argue that transformation leadership is connected with OCB, then you have to give some logic, and that logic is given by social action theory, which I have already shown you. And this social action theory was given by Blau 1964. Unless I go into literature, past literature, I cannot use this. So from past literature only the present theoretical framework will come. So it is just an extension of that. So the better you do literature review, the better is your research theoretical framework or your conceptual framework. The purpose of the literature review, amongst other things, is to highlight gaps and shortcomings with the existing work in your field. Then you build the theoretical framework. The theoretical framework details the perspective you will take to address the gap and shortcoming. So theoretical framework is nothing but why that your research this is how this can be filled, and that should be full of logic. It should not be without logic. If it is without logic, it is you're talking nonsense. If you want to talk sense, then there should be logic behind it, and that logic is nothing but your theoretical framework. And these two are very, very important for any kind of paper, and primarily your this empirical paper. The third one is methodological rigor. Madam, how much time I got?
Sir, I guess you can conclude now
Yeah,
because we're having
actually,
another resource person, another session after you.
yeah. Actually,
Yes.
I covered only one aspect of that. Okay, let me conclude here, right? Um, I'll not go into the methodological skills because that is another aspect of research. So according to my opinion, there are two important aspects of any research paper, and the first aspect is your theoretical aspect, which contains two major sections. One is introduction, where the research gap is clearly delineated, and the second one is your theoretical framework, where you establish a relationship between the variables of your study, and you tell very clearly why these variables are associated that way. What is your logic? They may or may not be correct. See, when we develop a hypothesis and go for testing of hypothesis, our hypothesis may not stand the scrutiny. The data may refute the hypothesis. Hypotheses are sometimes rejected. Okay, because your logic was incorrect. But at least when you start, you to convince the editor, you to convince the reader, researchers, that you go with logic. You do not talk nonsense. If you do these two things, I'm very sure the editor will take interest in your paper and the researchers will take interest in your paper to read. Then, of course, the other aspects of your paper like methodological rigor, your other aspects like your very good discussion portion in the paper, and finally scientific communication, scientific communication. And now there is a very strict regulation for this plagiarism, I think, and that we should also take care of. Most of the time we think that plagiarism is nothing but how can we avoid this, but writing others words using synonyms or using my words. No, that is not the way. There are major guidelines for avoiding them. Of course, I describe communication, and that is called academic writing. two professors, one from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and the other one is Indian Institute of Management, Indore. Sometimes, if you are interested, you may personally contact me and I can refer this book to you. And once you read this book, I'm very sure you will have a very good understanding of scientific communication. And if your papers are getting rejected very frequently, I don't think they will happen in future. Thank you, madam, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So now I will leave the house open for the question answer round. So if any of the participants are having any doubt, please inbox yourself, inbox your queries so that sir will clear your doubts. Yes, any one of you? Anyone from the participant?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Sir.
Yes, yes, sir.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
As sir has
Yes.
deliberated on the hypothesis and research questions, but what about the research objectives of any research? They are also very important part of, integral part of any research.
Yeah. So the research objects generally come from literature review, and that is placed in the introduction portion, and they guide the researcher for the entire research.
Yes. Okay. And sir,
of course, we are running short of time. I could have deliberated more on that, but I'm really running short of time.
I will take the number from the admins and deliberately frequently on these topics.
Okay.
But to my best of knowledge, for every empirical research hypothesis is not required. When we are doing an empirical research and there are not the sufficient literature or sufficient material is there, and our topic is genuinely new.
Yeah.
In those cases,
Yeah. Actually, you're absolutely right. When we talk of exploratory research, so it is very new. In that case, there is no guiding hypothesis. But in most of the cases, hypothesis guide us. So that is in general I'm talking about. But there are specific research studies where nobody has done any research and they are very exploratory in nature, where there may not be any guiding hypothesis. You're absolutely right.
and one more question, as you have told about COVID, and we are talking about doctors and other professionals. In those researches, we need to have the assistance of those person who can guide us or who can assist us. As you have told, potassium and sodium are potassium dilutes sodium in the body and so on. But the person who is a layman or the researcher of social science doesn't know that he has to take. He has to take the assistance of that professional.
Yeah. I actually, I just wanted to give an example through very common sense. But of course, I am not an expert in that, and my views should not be taken very seriously as far as science is concerned. It was just for an explanation purpose.
That is true, sir. As we are taking guides and co-guides, the purpose of hiring a co-guide is to have an expertise on that field.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
It's all right.